Hello, and welcome to my Modlist showcase, where I give an overview and opinion on mod lists to help find the right one for you. If you're like myself, the graphical mods of Skyrim are what first got you into modding. I remember watching mod videos a couple years after Skyrim's release and thinking, wow, it can't get much better than this. Yet here we are in 2024. So, for this showcase, we are looking at Row, created by Third Eye Squeegee and released for Skyrim Anniversary Edition. The version I've been playing on is version 1.10.0, released on the 5th of January 2024, which as of playing uses the latest version of Skyrim Anniversary Edition. Now, Skyrim itself is in a volatile state at the moment, and I fully expect a couple more updates revolving around its new paid mod system, so depending on when you're watching this, it's important to check on the Modlist Discord to see if the list is up and running. As for what this list is, it's described as an attempt to bring together the latest and greatest graphical mods and a true to vanilla gameplay overhaul. It's intended to look good and feel good without straying too far from the game we all know and love, featuring rebalancing, Anniversary Edition content tweaks, the best graphical overhauls, widescreen support, and controller support. Row is downloaded and installed using the Wabberjack Modlist installer, with a handy guide found on the list's GitHub. Also, as a general reminder, this list requires the Anniversary Edition Creation Club content, so after updating Skyrim, remember you may have to open the game and reinstall it all. I say this because I was foolish and forgot, and was left confused why this list wasn't working. So, as you can imagine, it has a hefty install size, totaling to around 240GB, plus the initial download is 156GB on top, but you can delete those mods after the install is complete. And when you finally open the mod organizer, there are a few optional mods you can turn on, mainly focused around UI changes, slight balances to gameplay, and a whole lot of strange mods. Like, all dragons becoming the state of Ohio. Because, yeah, why not? Oh, and it's worth remembering that if you want to change the screen resolution, full screen mode, and the aspect ratio, you use the INI file found in the SSE Display Tweaks mod. Usually I bundle graphics and performance together, but obviously there's a whole lot to talk about, so I've separated them. I'm going to start with a thing that you'll either love or be put off by, and that's the big old trees. With the Fabled Forest mod, huge portions of the map are coated with trees towering to the sky. There's this incredible sense of scale as you feel like a tiny wanderer in a giant fantasy land. Now in the forests it's obviously great, but this heightened density carries over to numerous towns, cities, and points of interest, making them all feel very different and difficult to see at a distance. As an example, here's the Ascendants list that I've been using for my live streams, and it's pretty close to vanilla. And here's what it looks like in Row. And so there's this trade-off where you get these immense fantasy forests that completely change the vibe, but you do lose some of that classic Skyrim scenery, where you see a building in the far distance and decide to head there. It's up to you what you prefer. Honestly, I was a little put off by it at first, but after recording this list, I've actually really grown to love these trees. Plus they're paired with all the new grasses, with mods like Volkvanger, Skulklendi, and Origins of the Forest, adding a bunch of diversity and creating that overgrown feeling. For textures, Skyland All-in-One is used as a base, with a plethora of others on top, many of which with parallax effects adding a ton of depth. Although overall it does feel close to vanilla. For example, Riverwood still has that rustic charm, rather than having textures that make it overly clean and expensive looking. And this same idea carries over to the NPCs. More often than not with high fidelity mod lists, they like to beautify NPCs with perfect skin, makeup and a well-groomed head of hair, but this list has a good balance of improving their ugly vanilla look without turning everyone into a supermodel. There's even the Children of the Hist and Children of Paria, which overhaul orcs and Argonians to have way more personality in their designs. As for weathers, natural and atmospheric Tamriel 3 is used, providing some of the highest quality weathers in all of Skyrim modding. It's definitely a personal favourite of mine, and the Lux series of lighting mods on top make the atmosphere all the better. Finally there's the EMB, with NAT3 being paired with the new Silent Horizons 2 to provide many of the best and modern EMB effects available. I found it offers a great amount of variety, where sunny days will pop with fantasy vibrance, but then some days it can feel incredibly gloomy and completely change the vibe. There's a reason Silent Horizons 2 is climbing in popularity. Its Nexus page is actually very interesting to read, even for someone like me who doesn't really understand this technical stuff. From the new lighting techniques to the texture sharpening and anti-aliasing, it does so much. The only thing that stood out to me as something I'd change is the adaptation. Basically, it's a technique that darkens the screen as you look up to balance out the lighting. Like when it's turned off, the sky can sometimes be overblown and you lose detail in the clouds, but with it on it can get a bit too dark for my liking. So if I was to do a playthrough, I'd personally tweak how dark it can get, or simply turn off adaptation but decrease the overall picture brightness. So originally I thought I wouldn't showcase this list until I'm magically blessed with a 4090, as, you know, it goes without saying that you need a beefy PC to run this at 60 FPS. Nvidia, if you want to send me a new card, I will happily sell out. But with my specs, which you can see here on screen, I thought it's still worth showcasing, as there's a lot of people in a similar situation who wonder if they can run it. It's also worth remembering that recording with OBS lowers my frames, so you'll have to trust me with performance numbers. First we'll look at 1440p, and on average I'd say my frames are between 45 to 50 FPS when outside. The times it dips to the lower end are almost always in crowded areas like the outskirts of cities, and for interiors it's usually held between 50 all the way to 100 FPS. Then looking at 1080p, there seemed to be about a 10 to 15 FPS increase on average. Exteriors are around 55 to 60, and interiors would always be above 60. Now we come to the good news and the bad news. The good news is the FPS is pretty stable. It can fluctuate a bit as you travel from the wilderness into a village, for example, but for the most part it rarely jumped up and down, and a stable frame rate is always better than a high one that's all over the place. The second good news is that it's pretty bug-free, by Skyrim standards of course. Honestly, the worst I found was some scenery that slightly clipped out the ground, which, you know, is fine. However, there's the bad news, which is that this list is heavily dependent on VRAM. I mean, the list isn't to blame, it's a Skyrim optimization problem, but the graphics mods just amplify it and destroy VRAM. My RTX 3080 is on the lower end of 3080s, with 10GB of VRAM, and it's barely holding on. Despite having a decent frame rate, the stutters are frequent and it's often very distracting. It's to the point where I really wouldn't do a playthrough of this list at 1440p, although even at 1080p it's still kinda noticeable. Unfortunately, it's just one of those Skyrim things. Like, don't take this as a criticism for the list. Like, it recommends right away that you need at least 12GB of VRAM, and I totally agree. I'm just silly and don't listen to instructions. So just make sure you know what your PC's capable of before playing. Okay, this is future me adding an extra note. I just tried the new VRAM R mod with this list, and it definitely helped remove the stutter. Now it downscales a lot of the textures, and it isn't supported by this list, so you know. Use with caution and don't bother the list author if something goes wrong. I just thought it was worth mentioning. And check out this video by Biggie Boss if you don't know what it is. The gameplay aims on improving upon vanilla rather than being a complete game changer, and so the huge amount of Simon Magus overhauls have been added, which you can't go wrong with. There's balances to perks and powerful new ones to improve build variety. There's new enchantments, alchemy recipes, standing stone effects, improvements to vampire and werewolf abilities, a religious worship system, and so much more. All with the goal of improving Skyrim's existing systems without needing to read a guide for how it all works. Even his newer mods are included, like Candlehearth, which allows you to rent a room at an inn for an extended period of time, and store items in a special safe. And there's Artificer, overhauling Skyrim's unique artifacts to be far more powerful. Moving on, the vast majority of gameplay mods are either balanced tweaks, or ones that focus on immersion. For some prime examples, you can fish anywhere with water, loot animal pelts and sell their carcass, tamper your weapons and armour on the go with a portable whetstone, climb up ledges, have fire pits hurt you, and currency now has location-based variety. All these things make the world feel more interactable, and it's perfect for the type of player that loves to immerse themselves into the world. And that leads me to my final point, with survival mode being improved with, survival mode improved, paired with the Starfrost mod. Firstly, it adds a new injury system, where each attack the enemy hits has a slight chance of injuring you and reducing your maximum health. And if you don't rest and recover these injuries, they can turn into infections, affecting health regen, so you need to find a cure disease effect. Plus there's a ton of tweaks to all the usual survival mechanics, like warmth and hunger. And I'd say if you do want to play survival mode, this is the one mod you probably should read the Nexus page for. Blade and Blunt is the main combat overhaul, putting an emphasis on resource management. Health, stamina, magicka regeneration is slower, while most actions use up more of the related resource. But to balance things out, attacking, blocking and staggering all at the right time is far more impactful, and become incredibly useful with the adamant perks on top. So I found that early game, enemies were tanking my hits and knocking me back, but as I trained, fights would be over with just a few well-placed swings. And there's a bunch more this mod does to staggering, resistances, movement speed and so on. Another mod where the Nexus page isn't necessary, but I'd still say it's worth reading if you want to know all the details. Going back to the Adamant perk mod, there's an add-on for a whole new skill tree focusing on hand-to-hand combat, if that's the way you roll. But if you enjoy fighting with a blade, the Precision mod adds collision and hit reactions to yourself and enemies, as well as a fancy little weapon trail when you swing. Speaking of enemies, a huge amount have been tweaked for better balance and just to make them more interesting. Like the Lawless mod, which overhauls bandits with new archetypes like brawlers and rogues, all of which fight differently. And the Dragon War mod includes a huge amount of variation in dragon type and makes them actually deadly for once. These types of adjustments can be found for the vast amount of enemy types, but there are a few new ones included on top, like the Bogmort creatures, which are sorta like undead that have been taken by the swamps of Morthal. Finally, there's changes to encounter zones, and without getting too technical, it basically adjusts the enemy difficulty within dungeons and general locations based on your level, rather than it being static. So as an example, a zone full of enemies can be labelled from easy difficulty up to very hard, and that, combined with your current level, will determine the strength of enemies. And basically it stops you from revisiting an early level area and killing every creature in one hit, no matter how menacing they look. The Spaghetti collection of mods subtly expand most of Skyrim's notable locations. It's not a complete overhaul, but instead adds more props and more architecture, so things aren't so bland. And the same goes for vanilla quests, where the quest expansion mods add more dialogue options and outcomes for many of Skyrim's major plot points. But as for entirely new quests, this list doesn't add any new large popular mods like Bruma, Worm's Tooth and such, instead focusing on what Skyrim already offers. Although, some of these mods can diverge pretty far from vanilla, like the Penitus Oculatus mod, which allows you to join the Empire's shadowy organisation after destroying the Dark Brotherhood, or the Stendar Rising mod, which has you rebuilding the broken village of Stendar, acting like a simplistic version of settlements from Fallout 4. And finally, it's worth remembering that all the Anniversary Edition content is part of the list, including a number of mods that expand the quests to feel more natural. Additional music, Chapter 2 and the Northerner Diaries include hundreds of new tracks that all keep to Skyrim's original vibe, and a huge amount of audio overhauls are added on top, completely changing the ambience and feel of combat, so it's far more crisper and distinctive. Have a listen to the audio for yourself. While the new graphics mods make the vanilla weapons and armour feel unique, there's a bunch of new stuff on top. The Heavy Armoury mod alone adds over 100 new weapons, including halberds, spears, glaives, short swords, quarterstaffs, mauls, hatchets and clubs. So yeah, a lot of variety. And that's ignoring the plethora of individual mods included, adding special weapons with a ton of style. And of course, the same goes for armours, where you can see this long list of mods here. And ignoring all the patches, these all add at least one new armour set, including many of the most polished and impressive looking armours on Nexus. Moving away from weapons and armour, the Sorcerer mod allows you to craft spell scrolls and magic staffs. And as for magic, the Mysticism mod distributes over 200 new vanilla feeling spells, plus the huge collection of spell mods from Dorenia added on top, adding new mage classes, focusing on things like moon magic, shadow magic, necrotic magic, and so on. For some extra points to talk about, all the usual UI and HUD mods are included, you know, Sky UI, True HUD and such, all styled with Rose Custom preset, although you can toggle on a couple new HUD designs in the optional mod section. True directional movement makes the third person movement in combat feel far more natural, and again in the optional mod section you can switch on better third person selection, which helps you interact with items. Combat and movement animations have been overhauled for yourself and a ton of NPCs and creatures. There's a bunch of new followers, including Inigo, Lucian, and Mana the Pocket Mammoth. How did I not know about this? NPCs will go on patrol if you're caught sneaking and get away. The Paradigm and Humble Beginnings mods let you select a background, and they don't lock you into a specific class or anything, they just tend to give you a few starting items, and a small boost in an appropriate skill. Finally, and most importantly, A Dog's Life adds more dogs, where now you can armour them up, feed them, and of course pet them over and over and over and over and over and over. So when it comes to recommending this list, the obvious thing is, can you run it? And if so, what frame rate are you willing to accept? Thankfully it's stable and still optimised compared to how good it looks, so it's easy to me to recommend based on that, and of course how amazing it looks. But yeah, you just gotta gauge if your PC can handle it. However, to only focus on visuals is unjust, because the gameplay is equally as impressive. I'm personally a huge fan of immersion mods, and this list is full of them. There's so many that I barely scratched the surface. Just stuff like better animal hunting, being able to sit in more locations, and having a button to warm your hands by the fire. It's all stuff you don't need to have, but they will help immerse you into the world of Skyrim, and they're perfect for those who love to roleplay. And just overall, there's a strong focus on improving vanilla, instead of bloating it with new systems. And so, if you want a beautiful Skyrim, with more roleplay options, great immersion, and gameplay that improves but still respects vanilla, this list is easy to recommend. Honestly, it's shot up to one of my favourites, and the day I can upgrade my PC, I fully intend on using it for a proper playthrough. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I really appreciate it if you gave it a like, as it helps the channel grow. And a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters, Alex Campbell, Connor Peterson, Esteban Walter, John Ratz, Ter Aura, Jaden Shaw, Jake Carlo, Dweezil P. Pants, Alec Bentley, Jack Ma and Christian Howell. And thank you to Moist Cheese, who donated on my Ko-fi page. Every contribution is just such a big help. Like, I put a lot of time into these videos. Like, it'd be easier if I just sort of rambled over gameplay that wasn't edited, but I like things to feel professional and organised and, you know, and just make these videos as helpful as they can be. And so yeah, with these contributions I can actually spend the time I want on these videos. So thank you so much. And yeah, thank you everyone for watching, and farewell.